Welcome to Lesson 2 in this unit on chords for the ABRSM Grade 5 Music Theory exam. You may have noticed that the lessons on intervals in Unit 4 and the last lesson on chords saw me sitting away from the piano. Indeed, there is not a single musical sound made in those lessons, and you might be questioning why or how I can justify calling these lessons in music theory. Well, it's a fair question. But I wanted to point out that music theory, in the examination at least, is entirely devoid of sound. You won't hear any music played to you, nor are you allowed access to any instruments to try out sounds. If you were doing your exam at a school, perhaps in an ICT suite with several other theory students nearby, you'd be expected to do the exam in silence. I suppose if you're doing the exam at home under parental supervision, there'd be nothing stopping you from singing during the exam, but there's no real reason to do so. But here I am at the piano, and here I'm going to play Amazing Grace in G major, with the theoretical knowledge you'd pick up from studying music up to grade 3 using the ABRSM materials. Pretty dismal and dull, isn't it? So let's add in the subdominant and dominant chords as required at grade 4. Rather better. And now adding in the supertonic and submediant chords too from the grade 5 syllabus. Much better. That rather proves what I was saying about how inadequate the syllabus for music theory is at the early grades. There really is no point at all in learning just the tonic triad in any key. So, for that reason, in Lesson 1, we looked at triads built upon the tonic, supertonic, subdominant, dominant, and submediant of all keys, major and minor, using up to 6 sharps or flats. Just to recap a few things. A triad in its basic form will be written either in 3 neighbouring spaces or on 3 neighbouring lines. Remember that in minor keys you must use the harmonic minor scale with its sharpened 7th, which means that the dominant triad is always major. Finally, as a form of shorthand, musicians use Roman numerals to label triads. So for the tonic chord, the chords built upon the first note of the scale, we use 1. For the supertonic, built upon the 2nd degree of the scale, we use 2. For the subdominant chord, the chord on the 4th note of the scale, we use 4. For the dominant chord on the 5th note of the scale, we use 5. And for the submediant, on the 6th note of the scale, we use 6. Okay, how is this knowledge going to be assessed? Well, cast your mind back a few minutes ago, and you'll remember that with tonic chords only, you really can't harmonise a tune and maintain your audience's interest. In grade 5, you will be presented with a question which assesses your ability to select from drop-down menus the most suitable chords for specific bars in a given melody, and the chords will be a choice of 1, 2, 4, 5 and 6. So let's have a look at this example. The first thing we must do is establish the key. The examples given by the ABRSM in its online practice exam and in the practice paper at the back of Discovering Music Theory Book 5 both happen to be in the major key. Do not be complacent. Remember that there are two options for every key signature. As it happens, there is one sharp in the key signature here, which indicates G major or E minor, but the presence of D naturals and the absence of D sharps strongly implies G major is the key. The next thing we must do is write the scale down and label the tonic, supertonic, subdominant, dominant and submediant like this. And then identify the notes which make up the tonic, supertonic, subdominant, dominant and submediant triads like this. Notice that while I just use a stave to do this, and in an examination you could use a blank sheet of manuscript paper, these two steps can be completed on ordinary plain paper, just like this. Here's the scale, with the Roman numerals identifying the important triads, and here are the chords completed. It's now very easy to complete this question. Simply examine each of the bars selected by the examiner and compare the notes within each against the chords you have written on your rough paper. If all or most of the notes in the bar match the notes of one of the named chords, then select from the drop-down menu the correct answer. By the way, in the exam you'll be asked to identify 5 chords and have a drop-down menu where one of the answers given is correct. Here I'm going to ask you to identify 8 chords without letting you have any hints from a multiple choice drop-down menu. Okay, the first bracket. In this bar we have E, C, B, A, C. 5 notes, 4 of which are in the triads A, C, E, which we can now identify as being the supertonic triad and label it with 2. The second bracket. In this bar we have D, A, G, F sharp and another D. Again 5 notes, and this time most are in the triad D, F sharp, A. So we can harmonise this bar with the dominant chord and label it with 5. The third bracket, G, B, C, D. 3 of these 4 notes are found in the tonic triad, G, B, D. So we can label it 1. The fourth, E, C, G, F sharp, E. Of these 5 notes, 4 are found in the subdominant triad C, E, G. So we can label it 4. The fifth, D, B, G, C, B. Again, 4 of these 5 notes fit the tonic triad G, B, D. So can be labelled 1. The sixth, A, B, C, E, E. 5 notes again where 4 fits the triad A, C, E and can be labelled as the supertonic with 2. The seventh, just a single note, F sharp. Not a problem. Of the triads we have identified, only one has F sharp in it, the dominant chord, so we can label it with 5. And the last, only 2 different pitches, G and D. Only one of our triads fits this, the tonic chord, so we label this with 1. Now we've just approached this as though we were in the silent examination room. But just to demonstrate that we have actually got this right, let's listen to it with the melody by itself. And now with those chords added in. And that sounds pretty good. Let's have a look at this second example. By the way, I've never seen this question tested on paper in any clef other than the treble clef, but the principal supports material has some examples in other clefs just in case. So we establish the key. There are two flats, so the key is B flat major or G minor. But there are F sharps, which are the leading note of G minor, and the last note itself is G, so we can safely state the key is G minor. We write down the scale of G harmonic minor on manuscript, remembering the sharpened seventh. We label the tonic, supertonic, subdominant, dominant and submediant, and complete the triads of those notes. Or like this on plain paper. And then, as before, we compare the bars selected by the examiner against these triads and we choose our answers. So the first bar, 3 B flats, a G and a D and 1 single A. That looks like a G minor triad, so label it 1. The second bar, there's a C and an E flat and a G, a triad of C minor, which is the subdominant of G minor, so label it 4. The third bar, a little harder, but we can see, apart from the G and the C, a D, an F sharp and an A, the chord of D major, the dominant of G, so label it 5. Just 3 notes in bar 4, and they belong to the chord of E flat major, the submediant of G. Label it 6. In the fifth bar, can you see that all but one note belongs to a triad written in 3 neighbouring spaces? That's the sort of thing that makes this easy. A, C, E flat, a chord of the supertonic, so label it 2. Bar 6. All but one of the notes here are in the G minor tonic triad, so label it 1. Bar 7 could be a little ambiguous. Read it backwards, and why not? You'll see C, E flat, G, a C minor triad which could be labelled 4. But you could read it rather differently and count the A as a more important note along the C and the E flat. So like bar 5, this bar could correctly be identified as a supertonic chord and labelled 2. Now the examiners should not give you the choice of 2 and 4 in the same drop-down menu in this instance, so you'd pick whichever of 2 or 4 appeared there. But what should you do in real life beyond the confines of the exam? Well, there's a strong argument for pointing out that there are just 2 semiquavers of G and 2 dotted quavers of A. So I would opt for supertonic here over subdominant. But if this was your composition, then the choice is yours. And who's got the right to tell you differently? The 8th bar, D and F sharp. This can only match the dominant chord, so label this 5. But what about that last note, the one with a question mark? This note G belongs in 3 triads, the tonic, the subdominant and the submediant. They won't ask you this in the exam as all 3 answers are technically correct, but the normal thing to do would be to finish the piece with a tonic chord. But if we had composed this piece for our own pleasure and not the purposes of an examination example, there'd be nothing stopping us from sliding to the submediant and then repeating the last 2 bars, finishing on the tonic like this. And what we've just touched upon will be covered in much greater depth in Lesson 3. See you then.